Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. You're listening to or watching or otherwise engaging with the Word in Your Ear podcast, which has been singing in the wires since 2006. What does this mean? It means that compared to Word in Your Ear, every other podcast is an arriviste, a parvenu, a jumped-up Johnny-come-lately. If you're a person of taste and discrimination who is aware of all this already, show your support by subscribing to this feed, leaving a like, and going to patreon.com/wordinyourear to see how you can get more closely involved. And here we go again.
Welcome to this and a proper old school legend, pioneer of the independent label and the cult record shop, who released the first singles by Shane MacGowan and Simple Minds and Kirsty MacColl and Joe Strummer and many others. Roger Armstrong, lovely to see you.
Hi, nice to see you guys. Haven't seen you since used to do those gigs down near the Angel. I used to go to those a lot. Those were the original, the analog, three-dimensional Word in Your Ear.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes, absolutely.
A while ago, yes. So nice to see you. Look, now we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the Chiswick label, which we were very fond of, and talk about Ace. But we're traditionally we tend to start by going back to asking people what the first music was they can remember playing in the family home.
In the family home.
Can you remember that? Which in your case would have been Belfast, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, born and bred there. I can actually go slightly back before that. My parents met because my dad was a drummer in a three-piece with his uncle, with his cousin Stanley, and they needed a singer. And as he said, he drew the short straw and had to go and ask my mother if she would join. She was singing with the Salvation Army at the time. And they used to play the church halls and around the local neighbourhoods briefly, 1939, and then the war got in the way. The first gig I went to, they took me, myself and my brother, to see Ella Fitzgerald.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Trio in the Opera House in Belfast.
How old were you? Can you remember?
How old were you?
About 10. 10?
Wow.
Yeah. The Oscar Peterson Trio, is that what you said? And now Fitzgerald.
Yeah, really made a huge impression on me. I mean, even just the Oscar Peterson Trio did a instrumental set. I remember he was a grunter. You know, we get those jazz pianists, and they had keys, and she was just imperious. And in fact, when my mother died some years back, she went to her grave with Ella Fitzgerald's "Every Time We Say Goodbye" playing.
Right.
So it was. Again, my parents were very encouraging that both my brother and I liked music, and my brother was 4 years older, so that's where I kind of got to know about rock and roll. I was a little too young, you know. So, but 58, he was getting to his teens. So we were kind of Buddy Holly, Everly Brothers, Little Richard, Elvis fans, as much back in those days as you could even hear that stuff, you know.
I was going to say, that's the point, isn't it? Because it was never on the radio, was it? Stuff like that.
Two-way family favourites, you'd sit through a pile of rubbish, you know, as far as you're concerned.
One pop
record, you know.
Yeah.
And,
you presumably had a record player in the home.
Yeah, we had a radiogram.
Well,
those big pieces of furniture, which came with when my dad bought it secondhand, it came with a bunch of kind of Bing Crosby and the like 78s, you know.
It came with it. I love that idea.
Yeah, 78s came with it. Yeah. And the only glitch really in the story is that by about 58 or 59, my brother and I wanted to buy a record, and my dad took us downtown to buy a record and insisted we buy a Winifred Atwell record on the basis that we'd be listening to it in years to come, whereas this Elvis Presley stuff would have long gone.
And funnily enough, this morning you put on Bumble Boogie, probably. That's right.
And so I used to remind him of that as the years went by. Further and further into music. Go
on.
Then I was exactly the right. I was almost born on the right day to be the big Beatles fan, you know, because I was, you know, just turning 14 when they arrived, and you know, that just was, you know, an amazing sort of thing, to arrive on your doorstep, such a radical. I think people who didn't live through it can't quite get how radical it was when they arrived,
And you saw them, didn't you, in Belfast? What year would that have been then?
63, I saw them, November 63. Only saw them, could not hear a note of music. 20 minutes of loud screening. Then I went, a year later, they played the King's Hall, which was what was known as an agricultural hall in those days. And they set it out with chairs. And the Beatles came on and the chairs went everywhere and people rushed the stage and it was kind of mayhem. I mean, I've never been blessed with great height. I was tiny in those days. So I retreated to the back and they were actually pumping the sound through, if you like, the house PAs, you might call it, which was, kind of cone speakers, these kind of blary speakers that they made announcements through. So I did sort of get to hear them because I was quite near one of those speakers.
Because you were far enough away from the screaming.
Yes, it was quite a big space. They did two, they turned the house, they did 2 shows, and a significant percentage of the population of Belfast saw them that night.
Did they speak in between? So that's probably the bit you remember if they spoke. Can you remember anything they said?
Yeah, but I could actually hear, all it was really was the vocals coming through, but there was a bit of backing track, but you could hear the vocals okay. And as has been shown, what the Washington concert predictors and what it shows, they couldn't possibly hear each other, and yet the harmonies are great.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, that they could do that? Absolutely.
No fallback, exactly.
The other thing about the King's Hall show, which I was delighted when I read she was appearing, was Mary Wells closed the first half.
Oh, right.
I was a big Mary Wells Motown fan already because me and my brother had bought Sound of the R&B Hits, which was the first sort of Motown studio compilation. And, it had Money on it, which the Beatles had already covered. That came out. No, it didn't. The Beatles had, let's see. No, they hadn't. They covered that later on With the Beatles. No, they had covered it. Sorry, I'm wrong there. And it had Bye Bye Baby, Mary Wells, which is the great companion to John's Twist and Shout, where Berry Gordy made Mary Wells sing it over and over again until her throat was shredded, and then did a take.
So, am I correct in assuming you were what we might call a bit of an anorak at an early age, weren't you?
Yeah, I took music seriously because back in those days, you had so few records, you played them to death. Yes. Played them over and over and over again. And
so you're reading the enemy and things like that?
Oh yeah, bought them all. Yeah,
all of them. So let's just remind ourselves what all of them meant in those days.
Record Mirror,
Melody Maker, and NME were the first 3, and then I think Sounds joined slightly later.
And there was Disc as well.
Disc and Music Echo.
Disc and Music Echo.
Oh, yes.
So at one stage there were probably 5 weeklies.
That's right.
It's extraordinary to think about that, isn't it? Really?
Which took you an entire week to read.
Well, if you were lucky,
you've been reading all the small ads and everything.
Yeah. I'd be down the paper shop like it was Thursdays they came out, and you'd go in there after school, kind of grabbing them and devouring them by Friday.
So was it easy to access all that stuff in Belfast in those days?
Yeah, the newspapers were fine. You could get those, and if you wanted
records and so forth.
Yeah. Well, you see. There was that thing in those days where there were records. There was every major town had a record shop would pretty much stock every single that came out, which is how George Harrison got Devil in His Heart for the Donnays on Oriole from NEMS, because they would have had a copy and he got the copy. It's so rare that record. It took me 20 years to find one.
Really?
And so you could go pretty much and get anything, but if you'd missed out on it, you could then order it. And they would put it on the boat from the warehouse in Liverpool overnight. You go after school the next. I did that. I remember doing that with Shop Around by the Miracles. We bought that, and it was okay.
So you're buying this stuff when you're like 13, 14, is that right?
More like 15, 16 by then. Yeah.
Right.
And again, my brother was a big influence on me. He had very good taste. He liked vocal group. He was more rock and roll. He never quite clicked with the Beatles and that end of things, but he stayed he was a huge Dion fan and stuff like that, But
so how old were you when you moved to the mainland, to Britain then, to England?
How old was I?
How old?
I moved. Let's see. Well, I went to university in Belfast and was social secretary while I was there. So I booked loads and loads.
Oh, right. So who did you book?
Right. Oh, God. The last one was the Edgar Broughton Band, which was terrific.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, the Edgars was fabulous. Before that, and mainly in the early days, it was sort of folk singers because the cost of bringing a band over was a little prohibitive. Or because Belfast, there was a war going on in Belfast, there were very few bands. There was a band called Truth with Jim Armstrong in it, which I would give support slots to all the time so it did some work. And sometimes I just go to Dublin during the week and grab a band, one of which I billed as Tin Lizzy without the H because of the accent for the Dublin guy.
That was you.
I was when we were a 4-piece with Eric Rickson in them very early days. And believe it or not, Phil spent most of the gig with his back to the audience, except when he had to sing, in which case he'd stare at his shoes and sing into a microphone. He was really shy in the early days. And so, yeah, and people like Ralph McTell, John Martin was a favourite, wild man altogether.
Right.
From Grossman, Roy Harper we brought in. We did bring in some bands, like people like Carol Grimes. And then sort of a real connection to my later career was we booked people like Brinsley Schwartz. We're booking the pub bands. I had put a circuit together where they could do Cork, Limerick, Dublin, Coleraine University. I had 5 gigs and they could get 3, maybe even 4 out of those. And these are bands getting 20 quid a night in London. So we were offering them more money. They got expenses and everything. So despite the war, they came. And,
right.
And the one that kind of made the connection in many ways, it was Dr. Strangely Strange early on. And then there was Gay and Terry Woods with the Woods Band.
Yes.
Ed Dean on guitar. I booked them and we got on well. And they said, look, here's our number in London. Give us a ring when you're next there. So I did. And that's when it opened up the Pandora's box of Belsize Park House with Ted Carroll, Sylvie and Gary, Frank Murray, Eric Bell, Gay and Terry, just a house full of people like sort of who were steeped in music.
Did you live there?
How did Rock On come out of that then originally? Well,
no, it was Ted really. Ted started that. I mean, I that's where I first met him. Then after university, I moved to Dublin.
So this was the old shop at, where was it? The
Goulburn Road was the original.
Right, okay. And then he was in Camden Town.
Yeah, rock and roll. I got my records at the Rock On stall. Rock and roll. Teddy Boy's got them all. Tin Lizzy, the rocker.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so I moved to Dublin. I worked with the Chieftains initially, and then Horselips, and I managed with a sort of show band we were converting called Chips, and that broke up in a mess of spinal tappery.
I like the idea of taking a show band and converting.
We were, yeah, but we stopped doing pop. We were doing Cool in the Gang. We're still covers. We were doing Cool in the Gang and stuff. We had a black drummer called Reno. It used to play with Bobby Huey, Huey, and drawing a blank on the name, Baby Huey.
Baby Huey, of course.
Yeah, and it was a great band. It was a really good soul band, 2 girl singers, 2 keys, guitar, bass, drums. But anyway, so then a friend from I'd met through Bees Mate Connie Ruin O'Loughlin was starting a band which was called St. James's Gate. So I came over to work with them. So that was about 73-ish. I'd stayed in touch with Ted, and while I was staying at Ruin and his wife Jackie's house, one day while we were there, Ted rings up and says, Eric's left. Lizzy, do you know any guitar players? Well, Bob Siebenberg, who went on to Supertramp, was in St. James's Gate, and his brother-in-law just arrived in town, and he was called Scott Gorham. So we sort of said to Ted, well, there's this new kid that Bob's brother-in-law's coming to town. Why don't you try him? So they did, and he did.
Right, good grief.
So didn't you manage Tin Lizzy, or were involved in their management for a while?
No, Ted managed Ted. Yeah. Ted was managing Lizzy. And then he'd had enough by the early 70s, or by 73-ish. They'd had the hit with Whiskey. And when they had the hit with Whiskey, Ted did the absolutely right thing. He put them on the Irish ballroom circuit, made a fortune, made real money, because you just needed a hit and they were Irish. That was it. They got booked. And Ted said, I had a flat in Ballsbridge in Dublin, had a spare room. And Ted said, look, Eddie, could Phil stay in your spare room? He couldn't stay in an Irish hotel at that time, so you couldn't be married to that many women in the same day. And So I got to know Phil through that as well, you know. So yeah, it was all very interconnected. And then Ted left Lizzy. He had already had Rock On and Goldburn Road, the market stall, my band had broken up, and he said, "Look, there's another one opening in Soho." He said, "Look, do you want to look after that until you get something?" And I never did. I never did get something.
Right. So where was that in Soho then?
Chinatown.
Right.
Just back of the fire station in Shaftesbury Avenue, basically. And
right.
It was basically, it ended up as a car park.
But God, yes.
Yeah, and they had it open as a market stall for a few years.
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you specialise in then? I mean, were there any shops like it?
Yeah, there was a few. There was Vintage, and there was Moondogs. Ted started before any of them. We were essentially oldies, but we were carrying, Feel Good's new records, and
Yeah, I'm going to say, because I wanted to talk about this. Yes, I was, looking at all the stuff around Chiswick and Ace, and being reminded of the fact, it seems to me, that the kind of independent singles thing predated punk, didn't it?
Oh yeah.
Talk about how that began to emerge, because there'd been a long period, it seems to me, in England where there were no independent labels. They'd just gone away totally, hadn't they?
Yeah.
But then, go on.
Yeah, there weren't many in pop. I mean, you had, you're going way back, you had, Esquire doing jazz, you had Vogue, you did have labels picking up contemporary American blues, R&B, jazz stuff, but you didn't really have many independent labels putting out what you might call pop records, basically.
Right. And so that, I always remember Rock On, the Camden Town one, as being, go there, you'll be able to get a copy of this, that, and the other. You wouldn't necessarily be able to get it anywhere else, because there was a new kind of independent circuit emerging, wasn't there?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's what started Chiswick, really, because Ted's idea was that he, when he left Lizzy, was he was going to license what he would call in-demand oldies from the majors and just put out singles, sort of R&B, blues, rock and roll stuff. And then I came along looking after Soho, and he knew I had ambitions to sort of make records and get into studio work. So he said, well, let's do the two things, because you had the bands that were playing or based on that old type music. So we'd record groups who were based on the old R&B or playing
Rocky Sharp and people like that.
Yeah, and then we'd put the originals out as well. So that was the concept of the label from day one. And in fact, the first record, The Count Bishops, was 4 cover versions, all of which actually were really covers immediately of British beat group versions of old R&B things. Yes. And then the second record, of course, was Brand New Cadillac by Vince Taylor, which was fully in demand. You might have to pay as much as sort of, £5 for that. Those.
Yes, imagine that. Yeah. Imagine that, readers.
And then the third one was 101ers, Keys to Your Heart, which is Joe Strummer as the lead singer. And then again, the cycle comes round. Of course, Clash recorded London's Calling for, I called Brand New Cadillac for London's Calling.
Yeah, London Calling.
How did that come about, the 101ers? Did you go and see them and just think, I must break a record by these people?
I was meeting an old friend in a pub that used to play in Ladbroke Grove, and they were sort of more in the background. They're interesting. And then Ted came into the market stall one day and said, I saw his band last night. They're absolutely sensational. Lead singer's a star. So we went to one of the student union gigs where there wasn't even a stage. It was the bar. And half a dozen long hairs at the bar, drinking pints, and the 101ers friends and Ted and me watching Joe play like he was playing Wembley Stadium, full tilt, take no prisoners performance. And we sort of approached them and said, we'd like to make a record with you. And that's what you did in those days.
Did you get a reputation for that, and people were coming to you,
people would drop,
people like that? Yeah,
people would sort of drop things into Rock On cassettes. Not as much. You kind of, we were, in those days you could go out pretty much 7 nights a week if you wanted to, There was so many bands playing around London that were of interest, and that, apart from, now and again, then Little Feat would drift through at the Rainbow, and that would be really big, exciting gig, So, it was sort of in the air. I mean, when we hadn't even put the 101ers record out when Joe left. And I first found out about it, I think it was the Red Cow. I was meeting somebody for a gig, and I was at the bar and tapping his shoulder and turned around, and there's Joe. And Joe had a habit of sometimes starting his conversation in the middle of the idea and working his way from the front to the back simultaneously. And he said, "Have I done the right thing?" Talking about
what is the
right thing? And he points to the guy behind him, skinny kid with long hair behind him, and says, "I started a band with this guy." "Well, thanks a lot, Joe. You know, you might have waited to
oh God, right,
put the record out." Of course, the other guy was Mick, and so I ended up buying him pints, and saying good luck kind of thing, because there was another band around the corner. There was always another band in those days. There was no shortage of people we could approach or around.
Yeah. I always seem to remember reading about this stuff in Let It Rock magazine, which you presumably remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Let It Rock was sort of, in a way, the printed version of Rock On.
Yeah,
that's really.
And then there was Charlie Gillett's Honky Tonk on Radio London, wasn't there, at the same time? So you got this feeling of this sort of new London traditional scene starting.
Yeah. And it come up from the early 70s. And as you said at the beginning there, this was pre-punk. This was
it was pub rock, really, wasn't it? Because it was Amazer Blades and Johnny Moped and the
they were
Millers,
on the side. In a way, we were a bit of a bridge between the pub rock and the punk rock.
Yeah.
Count Bishops was essentially the pub rock thing when he, I said they sounded like the Rolling Stones' first album played at 45, if not 78. A very revved up version of the R&B, and of course then with Joe and the 101ers, they were another bridge towards punk, So we sort of were working in that area, like before punk came in. And so, like when it did come, we missed the Damned the first time around, which was fine. But then we started picking up punk rock bands by 77.
So when you were making records in those days, you approached bands and said, "We'd like to make a record with you." Where would you go and how would you do it?
Oh, studio-wise?
Yes.
Yeah, Pathway initially.
Right. So that was where?
That was around, it's a 10-minute walk where I live.
Yeah.
Tiniest studio in the world. It used to be called the Sun of North London, the Sun Studio, and it had a real sound to it. It also had the benefit of a fantastic engineer called Barry Farmer, who was a brilliant engineer and not to be underestimated at all. Him and his brother built the desk. It was you had a ground floor and then a first floor where the bands hang out, where they had a proper echo chamber plate and everything, run by a guy called Mike Silver, who built it from the proceeds of being the either writer or co-writer of Arthur Brown's Fire.
Oh, really?
So that's how Pathway.
Still earning. Well, give us an example of some of the records that were made at Pathway that went on to do well.
Elvis Costello's first album.
Of course, yes.
Ted got to hear about it really first. Jake Riviera was working with that group Clover, and they used it. And because we had a bit of a false start, I went into Davy Robinson's studio above Hope and Anchor, and we cut the early version of the Bishops, as they were called, Chrome, and we cut an early Hammersmith Gorillas thing. They kind of didn't work out. Davy and I just didn't kind of work together in a way. Probably two egos that were too large, and then found out about Pathway, and so that's when 28th of August, I remember the day, 1975, took the Count Bishops in there, and we cut records all day, basically, cut all day. And the Speedball EP came out of it. I remember
that was Highbury Grove, wasn't it? Is it behind a church or something like that, was it?
No, it's actually within spitting distance of the Weaver's Arms. It's Grosvenor Avenue, I think it's called.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Carry on. But go on.
Anyway, so we cut a load of stuff, and Ted arrived with a big box full of, let's say, refreshment, and we all sort of got revived and did a second session, played him stuff, and it was a very packed day. It all came out eventually on a CD.
Right. And so you how many would you press up of a record like that?
Well, that was therein lay the tale. We used Lintone up in Holloway Road. We're an independent pressing plant, and They arrived. Rockin and Camden had opened by then, and they arrived. We put the first one on. It was warped. So Ted and I went through every single one, pulled all the warped ones, sent them back.
Quite right too.
Really, but we sold very well. I can't remember. That sold 5, 6, 7, 8,000, which was good business in those days.
No, absolutely.
But it's interesting, as Dave was saying, that that people think of the kind of big explosion of independent labels as being a punk rock thing, the kind of DIY thing. But actually, a lot of those labels must have been looking at you and thinking we could have some of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Stiff started after us, and I remember Jake and Dave brought Nick Lowe's first single on an acetate down to Ted and asked him which side should we put out. I mean, we kind of had Ted was really the central figure to the whole thing. He was sort of so respected for his knowledge of music and general taste. But yeah, we were kind of originators.
I was intrigued that both Chiswick and Stiff had the similar thing of there were fans finally getting to start their own record label, and thereby indulging in jokes about how small their operation was. Stiff was, if they're dead, we'll sign them, and all that. They had slogans all the time, didn't they? Sure. So tell us about the naming of Chiswick.
Chiswick was basically, it came from London Records, which was the revered British label that put out all the American stuff, London American. And rather than be London, we were the suburb of London, which in those days Chiswick was not one of the most salubrious parts of London. So it was a kind of downplay on that, really, Chiswick. And the logo is actually half of the Brunswick logo.
Of course, it never occurred to me that that's Brunswick, Chiswick.
Yes. An invention of the CHI to go with it.
Yeah.
The map, of course, is the A to Z in the background of the Chiswick area.
So you're kind of playing at being moguls, playing at being Armateticon of North London.
We were very inspired by, the Chess Brothers and the Erdicans and all those guys, the Mesners and, even the Baharis at Modern. People who actually went out front door, found out who was playing down their neighborhood and recorded them. I mean, that was and that's what you did. You recorded what you had access to, and pretty soon we started doing catalog very early on with Chiswick. Did the Link Ray album. One thing that helped finance the whole thing was an Elvis Speaks album that we got rights to. It was an interview album with Elvis. So no royalties, and we just put it out and sold a load because it was Elvis.
Oh, God, I bet.
And that helped fund things. Then we did the Hollywood Rock and Roll album, which is, from the Era label. It's a bunch of kind of rock and roll, rockabilly-ish things, and so we were doing quite well with that. There was a scene around at that time, a rockers scene around of younger people who were inspired by going to see American Graffiti. Yes. And they used to come into the shop, some of the younger kids, and say, have you got any more graffiti rock, they called it. Oh. So there was definitely a part of the old Teddy Boys and the older people. There was a younger market interest, and they weren't into punk. They really were into rockabilly and rock.
Right. That's true. There was a big revival, wasn't there? There was a hot rod convention in the King's Road. Yeah. And all of that was inspired by American Graffiti, wasn't it? Sure. The Teds and the draped jackets.
Oh, well, I mean, Saturday night down the Lyceum, they had huge gigs, just discos, where it was all girls and boys dressed in 50s outfits, and the girls would do the line dance and, the stroll. And, it was fantastic, really. Great scene. There was the White Hart in Tottenham. Ted and I went up there one day, and as we walked through the door, Sunglasses Ron walked over and had a word with us conspicuously, and then went to the Teddy Boys. No, they're all right. Don't touch them. Don't beat them up. They're the ones we get the records from.
So the catalogue business, that sent you delving into tape libraries and so forth, did it? Well, tell us about that.
Chiswick signed a deal with EMI, and EMI said, well, we've got warehouses full of the catalogue stuff. We don't need yours. So that's when we started Ace, and that's when we kind of went. So it was very useful. We were working the pop stuff through EMI and Metronome, and people had a couple of hits, had a hit in America with Stiff and the Tears. We were doing okay. But we always ran the catalogue business in parallel to that, especially when we brought Ray Topping, the great Ted called him the blues detective in, and him and Ted then started going to America, Pappy Daly's Glad Music was the first one with a lot of rockabilly, Sonny Fisher and people like that. And then Modern was the next one. Well, Ace, Johnny Vincent's Ace. That's where we cut a deal with him to use the name.
I think you coined the expression tape rats, didn't you? I think the idea you were going out there and just going through all their old, their old original recordings and master recordings.
Yeah. By the 80s, we really had hit gold dust because pay dirt, really, because we got into SLF1 digital portable tape recorder. Sony did, and it was like meant for domestic use, but it was a perfectly good digital tape recorder worked off Betamax tape. So we were getting perfect copies on Betamax tape without having to stack up, hundreds and hundreds of bucks worth of analog and lose a generation. So like when CD came along, we were ready. We had it all digitized. So we'd go to the States with this, pretty bulky, but still portable digital tape recorder and just, run it and run all sorts, day and night, basically, and work with these things, and making great discoveries along the way. And,
so how does that work then? What are you doing? Just sitting in a studio, just listening to yards of tape, thinking?
Yeah. Well, you knew what you took a discography with you. You knew what you were looking for, really. So you'd go to some of them were just a room full of random tapes. Some of them were well organized, and you'd go in there and you'd basically pull tapes and try and prioritize it and copy as much as you could in the time given.
How's that business developed and changed in the time you've been involved in it? Because I always think, back in, the mid-70s, the amount of catalogue was kind of that much holds up hands not too far away from each other. Whereas nowadays, the amount of catalogue is hands disappear out of shop. It's just absolutely massive. Yeah. Is anybody keeping track of all this stuff? Do you find?
Yeah. I mean, there's in some ways it was always a finite resource, so we keep finding stuff. So when we started, it was a gold mine. It was a huge amount of stuff you could possibly find. You're hitting something like the specialty vaults. Nobody had ever got there before, and finding all the session reels for Little Richard, finding the demo tape he sent to Art Roop.
Really, that was there.
Yeah, it was still in its original envelope.
No.
Yeah.
So this is specialty. Where's this? In Los Angeles and New Orleans?
Yeah.
Right.
Did you put that out?
Where was it all kept?
He had an office with it all in. We hired a studio, and I got a car and loaded boxes up and took them to the studio. A lovely man called Howard Valentine ran it, and sat there all day just playing stuff. And I remember being there with Ray once. We were doing a lot of blues stuff, and Ray was so demonstrative. Big man, but total enthusiasm, and as soon as a good guitar solo come up, Ray would be firing around this little studio doing phantom guitar, Yeah. I mean, it was a real thrill because I was hearing a lot of stuff for the first time ever, and it was my grounding and for in my love for blues and rhythm blues and rock and roll and a lot of that.
Because also when you're hearing the tape, you're hearing something before the record, aren't you? Really.
Yeah. Well, when it came to the Little Richard things, we wanted to do a box set, and I kind of had to persuade Art that it was, because he was saying, well, if it wasn't good enough to put out then, it's not good enough to put out now,
How wrong can you be?
Really? And I remember I said, look, I've just been in London to see the Da Vinci cartoon, which was a big event in London. It was in a special room with low light. They said, isn't the finished painting? Everybody wants to see where it started, kind of thing. Everybody wants to hear how you were there. We weren't. We want to hear how you made these records with Little Richard, And so he was persuaded, and the box set's still a magnificent thing.
I suppose that's the thing that's changed, hasn't it? Because like you were saying, going back to was it EMI you were quoting before?
Yeah.
They said we have a load of catalogue. We aren't doing anything with it because generally speaking, people did they?
No.
Because reissued records were cheap records, weren't they? Generally.
Yes, to the majors. Yes, it was budget line. It was a bunch of rock and roll hits with a cover of two people jiving or whatever in the front of the box, and that was it.
Which really struck a chord, didn't it?
Million Beach Boys compilations, all of which have got terrible illustrations of girls in bikinis on the front. It went on for years, didn't it? And then it changed, that business, so it became about premium priced beautifully packaged stuff.
That was our secret. I always called it stack 'em low, sell 'em high. You know, we were always expensive, and we stayed expensive because we really were convinced about the quality. Our mastering, I'm still convinced this day, was better than most anybody's. We packaged well. The photograph of the artist on the front cover was almost always, there was some exceptions, but almost always the correct period. And the sleeve notes were very, very well researched by people who knew what they were talking about. So,
yeah.
But that really hit a chord with the certain things that were happening when there was Gaz Rockin' Blues and clubs like that, and which I can remember going to around that time. And they must have picked up a lot of their records from you. And also, I suppose, there was a kind of vaguely a mod revival, wasn't there, going on at that time?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the mod revival goes on forever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Northern Soul.
Yes, when isn't the one?
Yeah, they kind of, that's right. Well, they just surface a bit, you know, it's got a dynamic off it every now and again. They pop to the surface. Yeah, I mean, it was a mixture of what we were doing, which was, if you like, kind of sort of academic approach, historic research approach, and also then responding to the clubs and what was being played in the clubs and feeding that as well. I mean, when Eddie Crowsdale started work with us in 1982 on Kent, and the sleeve notes were, you know, so-and-so played this at the Twisted Wheel in 19 whatever, you know, and it became a big sound, you know, it was all about the scene. And when we moved to CD, you know, I said to him, what about we start doing notes a bit more like Ace that are researched? And he did, and he's done brilliant research since then. And of course that led to, you know, him working with the great Dave Godden. Dave Godden's Deep Soul Treasures, which is an absolutely magnificent collection of records, I must say.
Give us some examples of acts that whose careers you kind of revitalized, or maybe even introduced to some extent over here.
One that came to mind recently was Irma Thomas, and it actually got mentioned in an article about Irma, where the guy said, you know, she wasn't that well known until Ace put the LP out. You know, Arthur Alexander.
Yes, that's right. I remember buying that.
On the yellow cover, which actually at the time,
Soldier of Love and all that.
We put the Judd single on it, the Girl That Radiates That Charm and whatever. I can't remember now. And Sally Sue Brown. And we thought that there'd been a deal with Modern and we had it through that. Turned out we didn't. But anyway, it had introduced Sally Sue Brown. Nobody had ever heard it. Very, very rare. 45 under the name of June Alexander. And a few years later, Bob Dylan covered it. And he has to have got it from that because it took me
yes, he did.
15, 20 years to get the single, you know. And I know Bob's a big collector, but...
Yes.
So
you say that the mod revival never goes away, and it doesn't. But have Teddy Boys gone away? Has kind of rockabilly fever gone away, or is it just temporary?
It's still out there, you know. There's still those rockin' scene. It's still going on out there. Probably has, you know, there hasn't been a rockabilly revival for a couple of decades. You know, there used to.
So we're due one.
We're well overdue one.
Stray Cats are about to reform.
Yeah. I think the Teddy Boys have gone away because they've lost all their hair and can't get a quiff up anymore.
Well, yeah, anyway. But you know, do you still have those? You know, because if you take the mid '80s, there were those scenes where you saw people walking around the streets of Soho. Oh, they're dressed in a certain way, and if I follow them, they will be gathering in a pub where they'll all look like that, and they'll all buy records that. Come from 30 years previous. Does that still go on, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what Ace do and how Ace treated it, it has moved more towards the deeply researched, well put together kind of historical one. I mean, on the rockabilly front, Max Descharnay, when he wrote Rocket in My Pocket, we put a compilation together, you know, and you know, it showed where we stood in the whole thing. A couple of the rockabilly guys at the record fair came to me and said, I've got everything on that. I've got it on original 45 CDs, all sorts of things. I bought that. Sounds better than any of them.
Right.
And, you know, so that's kind of more where it's at now is sort of because we've kept our quality up. People will buy these things, you know.
Right.
So,
you know, so you're coming up for a 50-year anniversary, is that?
We are at it.
Is that next year?
No, it's this year.
It's this year. 1975.
Yeah. 28th of August, 75. I put that as our birthday.
Right. So what are the activities around that?
Well, just to backtrack, the three of us, Ted, Trevor, and me, sold up our copyrights a couple of years back. That I'm still kind of hanging around as a sort of kind of unpaid consultant and compiler, and so a lovely Swedish company called Cosmos, great guys. So this year they ran a week of sort of parties. It was a pop-up shop in Camden, well, Chalk Farm. There was Fatback Band, and then Alec Palau runs kind of versions of old 60s bands. So it was the Seeds this time. And I mean, he puts them together. They're magnificent. They're really probably better than they were in the day, frankly.
I'm sure.
And we had a couple of parties and DJ'd a few things, done a few radio things doing this. So, it's sort of, we have celebrated it very well. It's been a sort of validation, I find, for myself anyway, after 50 years of sort of doing this thing,
Yeah, definitely.
Hard to get rid of it, hard to move away from it.
So what was, of all the things you've done under that umbrella, what's the thing you're most proud of?
I was proud of a lot of things. I think the thing that stands out, and I call my calling card, was when we did 3 volumes, 3 doubles around Dylan's Theme Time Radio Hour. And that came about because I was listening to it and I realized they were playing a lot of stuff off Ace Records. And through friends in LA, I knew Eddie Gorodetsky, who was producing it. And I got in touch with Eddie and said, look, can we put a thing on the website saying, Bob played that, and here's where you get it on an Ace CD. And he said, not my call, CC Jeff Rosen in. Next morning I come into work and there's an email from Jeff Rosen. And the opening line is, we love you guys. Great. By all means, put it on the website. P.S. Why don't you do the compilation?
Right. Oh, very good.
They must have done well, surely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, did well in a lot of levels, you could get people you couldn't normally get, Bob Dylan's name's on the front cover. Yes, I want to be on the record, And so, yeah, I mean, they were what I like so much about those compilations is their sheer eclecticism,
Well, that and also the interesting thing that struck me, there was a pattern on that Bob Dylan didn't include much music on Theme Time Radio Hour after he had started to affect music, if you like. It was mostly from the music he remembered growing up. Yeah,
a lot of it. But he did.
There were a few, but not that many.
No, it was sort of a bit further back, But yeah, I mean, he has a great taste, and he got a very, very large record collection himself, So, I mean, people were saying, oh, it's Eddie put it together and Bob's name's just on it. But Eddie, too, I had dinner with Eddie in LA and we talked about it. And he said, no, Bob was absolutely, completely engaged. And they recorded them all like in hotel rooms while Dylan was on the road and stuff like that, And he told me one story where I can't remember what the record was, but they had a theme going and Bob said, I know a great track for that. And he knew not only which of his houses it was in, but where it was in the collection. And had it FedExed. It's been dubbed.
Tell the maid to go in the third room from the left. Now walk to the right.
Yeah.
Put your hand in.
And there it is. And original 78 as well.
That's extraordinary.
I mean, he is very, 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 very deeply into music, Dylan. I mean, you meet some artists, you go into their houses, whatever, and they've got 3 records, 2 of which theirs,
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But it was interesting, the Theme Time Radio Hour, and it's not the only example that you can suddenly just open up whole areas of the past that people hadn't previously known about or had forgotten about or whatever. Right. And presumably that will continue, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing I think we've always been is the great compilers. I mean, from early on, Trevor Churchill, the other partner, who doesn't get as much mention, he was sort of more the business affairs. But, the thing that joined Ted, Trevor, and me together was a great love of music, all 3 of us. I mean, differences of sometimes of what we like. Ted and I were closer to in our tastes than Trevor. But in the early days of CD, he realized there were a lot of things not on CD. And so he started a series called The Golden Age of American Rock and Roll, which was hard to find hits, So anything that had ever entered the Billboard chart qualified. And then the next thing was find the best tape you can find. So, I mean, that was an immense series. Him and Rob Finnis did it. Really fantastic. And that was really the beginnings of us doing that kind of I was not as broad a brush. It was everything. It was pre-Beatles. It was up to 63 kind of thing. And that ran for about 13 volumes and had spin-offs and doo-wop and country and, jazz and folk and all sorts of things. It was an immense piece of work as well.
So you'd rather do compilations than just about anything, wouldn't you? I mean, all people listening to this or watching this, they all think, I would love to do a compilation album and put it out. You've lived that fantasy, haven't you?
Yeah, people do. I mean, over the years, we approached them and said, this would be a great comp. And I said, no, it'd be a great tape to make up for your mates.
Yeah, it's the ultimate mixtape, isn't it? It's not it's not one copy. It's actually available to buy.
Yeah, you see, I've always said you start with a strapline. What's this compilation about?
What's it about?
If you can't come up with a strapline, you haven't got a compilation.
That's a good point. You need a headline.
Otherwise, it's just records I like. Yes.
Give us an example of a strapline.
Yeah. Even when we're working with, even theme time. They were themed. Each company show was themed. I am working with people like, Bob Stanley. He's great at concepts. Comes up with great ideas. Jon Savage started with 1966 around his book. And then I said, why don't we do 65, John? And then, of course, it's now reached 1990, that series. And Bobby Gillespie's really good. He's done 2 compilations, and he's very, very focused. The first one was basically the morning after the night before, effectively, sort of a chilled stuff. The second one, which I love, which is called I Can't Believe You've Gone, which is just based around that idea of a sort of sadness and a losing people thing, And it's a beautiful compilation. It really holds together, just has a mood about it, And then more recently, Paul Weller's, his soul compilation, again, beautifully put together. It feels connected, because that's the secret of a compilation. It has to flow.
What's the title of the Paul Weller soul thing?
No, you've got me there.
Oh, no. Don't worry. No, I just like that idea that you write the headline first. It makes complete sense.
Well,
you've gone.
Eddie had been working with Paul for years to try and do a compilation, And again, pretty busy because he's got a successful career. But eventually it sort of came together. And he's done a beautiful job. And he might do another one.
Right. So what's your personal favourite compilation?
My personal favourite compilation is a good thing. Probably at the moment, the one I've just finished working on might be the answer to that.
All right, go on.
224 track box set of 8 CDs with a modern record story, 1945 to 1959.
There you go. In your local high street in due course.
Yes, indeed.
At some point.
That's been an epic.
Right.
Ray Topping started it in the late 90s. Then it kind of it got messed up through various things, and then Ray got ill, it got abandoned, and then I was always determined before I really retired to do it. So John Broven and me have been working on polishing it up and extending it, and it's amazing music.
You will never retire, Roger.
Probably
you never retire, because it's basically, in the end, it's you playing a load of records and making lists of them and putting them together into compilations.
Correct.
There's no need to retire.
Why would you retire?
Why would you?
I won't retire from that end of it. I retired from the Excel spreadsheets. I retired from the.
You retired from worrying about it. I would
imagine about it. Correct. And that's what I really want to do. I love putting the Chiswick triple together. It was just a real joy to kind of revisit our old stuff on that level. And then sort of been working hard on the modern box set. So and I've got a few other ideas.
Right. Good. Well, look, lovely to talk to you.
And you guys as well.
That's terrific.
And all the best with it all. It's been fascinating.
Well, I reckon when I was looking at some figures recently, numbers recently, I think over our tenure at Ace Records, we probably put out something like 60,000 unique tracks.
Right.
So, I did a 2-hour radio show, a guy called Ralph McLean in Belfast a while back. He said, well, let's do the whole story. And I said, Ralph, 60,000 tracks in 2 hours. No. It's going to be like a random selection of some of them. As this has been a random selection of some of the sagas and stories and, what we were about all those years, So if you want to do volumes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's plenty to be talked about.
All right.
Okay.